More now and how this could shape the ongoing conflict. Let's bring in Associate Professor Matthew Sussex. He's, of course, a researcher and fellow at the AMU. Matthew, thanks very much for your time. A crazy 24, 48 hours, this aborted rebellion. What is the impact on Putin's authority, first and foremost?
Well, look, Kieran, I think that Putin emerges from this really quite badly damaged and weakened. He's got a number of real questions around his leadership that have come up from this kind of crazy, day and a half in Russian politics. One of them is, how is he going to walk back, going on national TV, warning of civil war, and saying that Yevgeny Prigozhin, his former friend, needed to be liquidated, and then, fronting up a few hours later and saying everything's fine? How's he going to do that? How is he also going to, damp down the fact that Prigozhin is someone who has been hailed by the Russian media and by Putin as a hero? And he's come out and said not only that the war in Ukraine was based on a lie, but that Russia needs a new president. And finally, you've got Prigozhin, someone who's deliberately now stood up to Putin using military force, who gets away scot-free. And previously, under Putin, if anyone announced any kind of dissent whatsoever, they would find themselves very quickly in jail or having an accident.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? And that accident prospect, I want to ask you about that in a moment, but before we do that, is there any chance Prigozhin, the former hot dog seller, then restaurateur, close confidant of Putin, he was very close to him, is there any chance that this is all one elaborate ruse?
Look, it's not beyond the realms of possibility, but I think sometimes when we look at Russian politics, we look too closely for sort of deep Machiavellian plots, when often the case it's just something happens and then it snowballs. Prigozhin has been telegraphing for a long time that he's disappointed with the Russian Defense Minister, Sergei Shoigu, who hasn't been heard from since, and the Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov. He also hasn't been heard of since. And he has said that if something isn't done about the orders that are being given that are sending Wagner fighters to their deaths, then he would do something about it. So this is something I think that has been visible for a while, which raises another question, that if the Russian security and intelligence services are any good, why didn't they pick up on this, and why did they do nothing when, in fact, the United States, as we know, heard about this in early to mid-June and was already making contingency plans?
If you were Wagner Chief Prigozhin, and just on that prospect of an accident, you wouldn't be too relaxed, would you, with the deal that's been done? You might be taking a few precautions just to ensure that Mr. Putin's good to his word.
Yeah, it's interesting to see what precautions he could take, given that he's off to exile in Belarus. No, I wouldn't feel very comfortable about my personal safety, either en route or when I got there. But the thing about Prigozhin is that he does have form in terms of knowing an awful lot about the goings-on of the Russian elite and about Vladimir Putin himself. We should remember that he was the head of the Internet Research Agency, the Russian troll factory that, of course, meddled in US politics and politics around Europe and elsewhere. So he is very good at information operations, and he certainly does have, you would think, a fair bit of information about the inner circle around Putin, not to mention the president himself.
How important have the Wagner forces been in Ukraine?
They've been somewhat important. More important to Putin, I think, to show up the performance of the regular Russian military. Now, Wagner, typically Wagner prior to the conflict were very highly trained ex-Russian military operatives in various business ventures in Africa. Now, in Ukraine, you need more troops than that. So Prigozhin has, of course, gone around the jails of Russia and said, we'll commute your sentence if you come and fight for us. And that means they get used in some of the most brutal front-on assaults. effectively a meat grinder. And, so they were somewhat effective, but it still took them months and months and months to get near capturing the town of Bakhmut, which the Ukrainians resisted very, very heavily. And there was even a report in, I think it was the Washington Post, that suggested Prigozhin had been talking to Ukrainian intelligence, offering to say, here's where the Russian regular forces are if you let me take over Bakhmut. Now, that's probably, a bit of compromat being used by the Russian Defense Ministry. But nonetheless, it goes to show how deep the schisms between the different sort of military arms of the Russian state are.
And finally, I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look in detail, $110 million Australian package. It's the latest instalment in the Ukrainian military support, not the Hawkeye, or not the Bushmasters, not the Abrams tanks. Those three were all things that the Ukrainians wanted. They're not on this list. How will it be received?
Oh, look, I think the Ukrainians will be grateful for any assistance that they receive. It is certainly the case that they were hoping for F-18s, for Hawkeyes, for more Bushmasters, potentially tanks as well. It remains to be seen whether, this is the big tranche that the Prime Minister is going to announce, or whether, in fact, he might make a subsequent announcement when the NATO summit rolls around in a couple of weeks' time. It's certainly an appropriate place to do that. But in the short term, I think the Ukrainians will say, well, thank you very much. Any support you can give is most welcome.